Greetings. This is Real Talk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation. And I'm your host, Dr. Sundiata Keita Cha-Jua. Today's guest is a special guest, Dr. David Crockett. He is a professor of marketing research, formerly at the University of South Carolina, but currently at the University of Illinois in the great city of Chicago. Dr. Crockett's primary research interest is in the sociological aspects of consumer behavior, particularly the consequences of social inequality. He investigates the creation, manifestation, and resolution of class and racial inequality in the marketplace and addresses public policy initiatives designed to alleviate inequality. Dave's recent research includes work done with a research team that included Sonia Grier, Dave himself, Gulamay Johnson, Kevin Thomas, and Tanya Bradford. And this is a 2023 article entitled Race in Consumer Research, Past, Present, and Future. And we're going to talk a bit about that article. Also, a 2022 piece entitled Wealth in People and Places, Understanding Transnational Gift Obligations. Both articles appear in the Journal of Consumer Research, which is one of the top tier journals in Dave's area of research. And then there is a 2022 article that was co-written with Zainab Arnsell, Dave Crockett, and Mara L. Scott, entitled Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, in the Journal of Consumer, also in the Journal of Consumer Research. All right, so Dave, let me bring you on. Welcome back. Welcome
Thank you,
back.
thank you, thank you. I appreciate it. And what's up to your people out here? I'm always pleased to be a guest on this show and certainly honored.
Well, brother, you're not only a great scholar, significant activist, but we've known each other longer than both of us should admit publicly.
That's about
Was
right.
it 89?
Yeah, 89.
Yeah,
Mhm.
89. Yeah.
Was
Wow,
just thinking about
University of Missouri.
that.
Yeah, we both have changed a bit.
Wow, yeah, man. We both got some great brother. I've just kind of been dealing with a case of heel bursitis. I'm a
Mm,
proper middle-aged man.
yeah.
I got bursitis, man. Like, what is that?
Hey, brother, I got bursitis in my left elbow,
Yep.
lifting, and I mean, it's like a golf ball on my elbow.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
do you do? What do you
hmm
do?
Right.
But anyway, it's been man, it's been 4 years and 4 months since you were on the show.
Right.
And so we got to kind of reintroduce you,
hmm
right? So as you know, I'm a devotee of Bill Cross's Negressa's thesis. And so I always want to start with who you are and how you became you, right? So can you talk about your biography and kind of excavate your background? Tell us where you were, where you came to maturity, um, what's the historical period and the class background of your family, and talk a bit very clearly about the process by which you became a radical Black
hmm
scholar activist.
Sure.
I want to know books you read,
hmm
organizations you participated in, what you did, how you
hmm
transformed yourself, and ensure that you didn't become Brian Donald.
Okay. I'll try that. So I will try to do this, somewhat efficiently, and I will ask you to stop me and probe, if there are places where you want to go a little bit deeper. Um, But I'll start with, early childhood stuff. And parts of this story at least. So I was born in Trenton, New Jersey in the early 1970s. Um, my so I was adopted as an infant, so I've never met birth parents. That becomes somewhat important to my story because of the trajectory that it put me on. So I was adopted by a couple, the Crockett's. So people always ask about the name. That wasn't on purpose. That just kind of happened, right? Um, and we were working class. My mother, Arlene Crockett, was a person who as far as I can tell, she adopted or fostered 11 different kids over the course
Oh
of it
wow.
that I knew about. So our house was the house that kids who had been removed by the state would often come to our place, at least initially. So there were always children kind of in and out
Mhm.
of the house. When I was very young, I was one of those that she adopted formally, and there was at least one other girl that she adopted formally. My father, I don't remember as much about. I understand actually from his death certificate that he was a construction worker, and she was a homemaker. Um, but pretty early on, I went to I went to some kind of private school that, only in retrospect, I thought there's no way that they could afford this. I'm speculating here, but I believe that Arlene Crockett was a domestic worker for the principal and his wife,
Ah, okay.
at least at one time, and that is how that happened. What led me to that speculation is so Henry Crockett, my dad, passed away when I was about 6 years old. He just got sick and passed. And in fact, we were on vacation seeing
Oh
mom's
wow.
family in Florida when that
So you
happened.
mean suddenly passed, not a
Fairly
long period
suddenly,
of illness?
not a long period of illness. We knew that he had been ill, and I think there had even been, and I'm remembering way back, but I believe there had been some discussion about whether we should go on this trip. But we eventually decided to go, and he passed while she was out of town, while we were all out of town. And then about a year later, she passed. She had a heart attack.
Oh.
Um, and so from that time, all the kids who were there, there'd been a group of, I think, five siblings that had joined us just a few months before. So they were all sent a different place. Um, the other girl, my sister Tamika, who was also adopted, we went to live in Rochester, in New York, with
Mm.
a sister-in-law. So my mom had one son by birth, who was much, much older, and his wife and my mother had become close. This was like her daughter. Um,
Okay.
so even though those two had been divorced, she took us in initially. So I lived in Rochester my second grade year of school. Um, there had been some talk about kind of what would happen to us, and as part of that talk, um, I came to know that the white couple who were the principal and his wife of that school had offered to take me in. And, people were like, absolutely not. Right. And it was only later that I figured out that she must have cleaned those people's houses.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
kind of why that happened. The wife had been my kindergarten teacher. Um, so, so we end up, going to upstate New York for a bit. And I mentioned all of this because um, this was a change from barely still in the working class to kind of poor.
Hmm.
And then we moved to upstate New York with my sister-in-law, my auntie, um, and she worked for AC Delco, who makes the spark plugs.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
She worked there, on the line. So she was a unionized working class a little bit more well paid. She'd been
Right.
divorced from my brother, but it was a move up in social class.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
even at that age, I didn't have
To the stable working class.
right.
Yeah.
So even at that age, I didn't have a vocabulary for that, but it was something that I could observe that life was just different in
Mm-hmm.
this other place. Um, I didn't stay there for very long. My Arlene's brother, my uncle, asked if I could come back to New Jersey to live with him and my grandfather, so Arlene's mother. My grandfather was getting a little older, kind of needed someone to be with him in the evenings and so forth. And so um, I thought my uncle walked on water. So, as soon as I heard, I was like, yeah, I want to be out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, I left Rochester at the end of my second grade year. So basically, as a 9-year old, I moved to New Jersey to live with my grandfather, who was a retired Baptist minister. And my uncle was my legal guardian. My uncle was a machinist for a company there. And so, again, so I moved to a place
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
also stable working class.
Right. But he's an artisan.
Yeah,
Yeah. Craftsman. Yeah.
he took me to where he worked, and of course, I didn't understand any of the things that he did, but it was my uncle that probably ended up really putting me on this path. Um,
Mm.
he was he introduced me to Coltrane, so I lived there in my grandfather's apartment
Okay.
from the start of third
Okay.
grade to my freshman year in high school. It's my uncle who introduced me to H. Rap Brown, to Coltrane, to what it. He mentioned like words like Black Radical, but I didn't know what any of that kind of meant.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
there was some exposure to a number of different ways of thinking. He wasn't an overt radical in really in any way that was obvious to me, even in retrospect. But there was a kind of appreciation for certain kinds of things. I went to a Catholic
Mm-hmm.
school when I was there. And by the time I got to the seventh and eighth grade, there was a brother who was a teacher there who was actually a Black radical. Um, we used to do these like acting kind of we used to act out poems from Black voices
Mm.
when I was a kid, right? In fact, we
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
performed in a place in Newark for Mary Baraka.
Oh
When
wow.
I was like in the seventh. I didn't know
Probably
who any of
Spirit
these.
House, man.
I'm sure it was, right? I didn't know where it
Yeah.
was, right?
Yeah.
And so
Right.
like these
Right.
are
Right.
things
Right.
that were
Right.
part of coming up, but I didn't know kind of what they were or really how to appreciate them. Like I kind of said, I didn't have a vocabulary for any of this stuff. Well, like probably when I entered the eighth grade, my uncle, who was my guardian, got cancer. And so his health kind of steadily deteriorated. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
I was doing some caretaking for a bit for both of them for a while. Not for very long, but I remember kind of having to do that. He was in and out of the hospital and so forth. And after he really started to get sick and he was in decline, um, he reached out to his eldest son and wife, and he was estranged from his eldest son, but he knew it was time to kind of bury the hatchet,
Mm-hmm.
figure out kind of the next step. And he asked his son Richard to take me in because he knew he didn't have a lot of time left. And so Richard and Anne and their two daughters um, consented and asked me if I wanted to come live with them. At the point where my uncle ended up passing. And so the middle of my freshman year, um, like a day before the holiday break of my freshman year, my uncle
Mm-hmm.
passed.
Man, I'm
And
sorry to
so,
hear that.
it's a harder story for y'all to hear than it was for, because there are long gaps of time between these
Right.
things, but still, there was some change. So I moved to St. Louis over the holiday break, my freshman year of high school, um,
Mm,
with Richard and Ann. Richard was my cousin, but that's my pop.
right,
And
right.
so he worked for 30 years at General Motors.
Mm,
He had been really an electrician at General Motors. He was in charge of the heating and cooling at the plant. And I remember him always saying that like the proudest thing that he accomplished as a worker was that nobody ever died in his plant. And for those folks who know St. Louis, that's a story every summer of when they
yeah,
still
yeah.
had
Oh, yeah.
plants with people dropping dead of heat exhaustion in those plants. And he said that never happened at his. Um,
Now,
and
y'all in the North End?
you know what? We lived kind of near West County. In fact, so we lived about five
Mm,
minutes from where Michael Brown was shot. Um,
okay, okay.
yeah. So it's
Damn, so
kind of
you
like
out
there's
by Ferguson, man. Wow.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay.
In fact,
Hazelwood. Oh, well, wait a minute. You told what year did you go to St. Louis?
I moved to St. Louis in January of 1985.
Okay, well, that whole North County was being blackenized by then.
Right.
Yeah, because they were
My
pushing
parents,
black folks out of St. Louis to the
right.
North County for sure.
Right. And so my parents moved to Northwoods in 69 when they
Hmm.
got married. And they were one of the first Black families in that area at the time. And that neighborhood, of course, it was all Black by the time I arrived.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. Look, man, 11 of those 13 suburbs in the North are black. I
The
mean, like
blackest places have
all
ever been.
black.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, here's the rub, because I also want to work in like a policy angle to this. So I moved to St.
Okay.
Louis in 85. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that Social Security is for retirement, but it's also for orphans.
Right,
So
right.
technically, I was an orphan because my parents, Arlene and Henry Crockett, they passed away, and then I had legal guardians subsequent to that. I was not readopted, and I remember this being a discussion
Mm.
because the economics wouldn't work, right? So if I
If you
was
had been adopted,
right,
readopted. Yes,
yeah, if I
yeah,
had
yeah,
been
yeah, yeah.
readopted, I would have lost Social Security. And that's the reason I had Social Security. That's how I went to private schools,
Okay, okay.
right? Um, so when I moved to St. Louis, I went to a Lutheran school. I went to Lutheran North, which is still there. Um, and it's an interesting place because I remember having to explain this to people later on. A non-elite private school. I know for some people that's like not a conceptual category, right? Right. um,
But
but
they do
Lutheran North,
exist. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Lutheran North, like, is the place that, like, again, it's about 5 minutes from where Michael Brown was killed, um, and that is the place where a lot of things sort of crystallized for me about inequality and how it works. I had been, New Jersey, I had been mostly in all Black environments. The
Hmm.
supervisors were white, right? Authority figures were white, but the citizenry was largely not. I'd moved to Northwoods in St. Louis, which was, and I think my neighborhood at the time was predominantly Black, but not exclusively so.
Yeah.
Um, when I went to Lutheran North, so that period in the late 1980s, and funny enough, Nicole Hannah Jones has talked about this. Um, that is the moment where the United States, in some spotty ways, came closest to relative desegregation of schools. Wasn't
Hmm.
super close, but relatively close was kind of during that period.
Closer than it's ever been,
Closer than it's ever been.
before and since.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
Well, Lutheran North kind of sat in a place, and it was very interesting because, like you said, all of those North County suburbs were changing. Lutheran North was the school that was still pretty intentionally about half Black and half white.
Mm.
because it's Lutheran, it had a set of feeder schools that were predominantly white. But if you
Yeah.
were in North or West County, you kind of got routed to Lutheran North rather than Lutheran South, which is, over there by not the Galleria, the other one that's like even farther south than that.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, them
Lutheran
rich
South was
folks.
yeah,
Them
yeah.
rich folks, man.
Right. Right, right. So
Yeah.
when I played football, well, when I participated in football, let me not exaggerate. When I participated in football, all the schools at the time, because I was at Lutheran North before it became a football power in St. Louis, but all the
Yeah.
schools in the leagues that we played in were almost all exclusively white. So we played against wealthy white schools, but that we were not that school.
Brother, I hope that you had the capacity to tune shit out. 'Cause when I got kicked out of my high school, and the only school they would let me in was a school that had 925 white kids and 25 black kids, and I played basketball.
Mhm.
Man, they was calling me some things.
Ooh, yeah, I don't envy
Yeah,
that. It was interesting because I began to like I had learned about certain kinds of racial dynamics, but the kind of dynamic that I had experienced as a small kid was mostly of the you could make a case that this really is a kind of neo-colonial setup. But my
hmm,
everyday world was predominantly black. When I moved to St. Louis, I had never been called nigger before that I could really remember, or at least I knew what it was, at the time,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so, you're gonna get called that
yeah.
if you live in St. Louis. That is just kind of,
Oh yeah.
yeah, that's happening, right?
In the '80s, you moved back to an old school internal colonial situation. Wasn't no
Yeah.
neo about
Yeah,
the North County, bro.
it really wasn't, right? It really wasn't. So, so Lutheran North, kind of, it made me realize like that I needed a language to understand kind of what was happening. It was like I was always getting B's and I knew I was just as smart as these white kids and I couldn't figure out how they were getting A's and I wasn't, right? It was that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so a couple of things began to happen for me in high school that I would say kind of put me on a crossroads. Um, One of them was, I met my best friend for life there, so Doug.
yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah,
we both kind of ended up at that place. His family had migrated from Virginia, and I had migrated there like within weeks of each other.
yeah,
We had a mutual friend. Our parents had a mutual friend that put us together. Um, and he lived on the Illinois side. So, he drove in pretty much every day because his family lived in Troy. Um, and he had a job. And I'll never forget, he got paid the student minimum wage. You don't remember that? Oh, in the 1980s, for your folks who weren't alive then, in the 1980s, they
mhm,
could pay, if you were a student, they could pay you a sub minimum wage.
yeah.
And it was
Right,
called
right,
the student wage, right? And he used to get
right,
that.
right.
That was the
Absolutely.
first time I heard about it. It's like,
I'm trying to figure out how he got above the student wage.
no, he didn't.
Oh, he
He got paid
didn't.
this. Yeah, he did not get.
Okay, okay. He got
Yeah,
paid the sub minimum.
he got paid
Okay,
the student wage.
yeah.
That was
Okay,
like,
I misheard. Okay, I
sorry
got
about
you.
that.
Yeah.
It's like, what the hell is that? He was like, yeah, man, that was like he was the first person who ever said anything about exploitation to me, right?
Mm.
And it's like, oh, okay, like, yeah, that ain't right, right? And so, that kind of set me on. I began to get a vocabulary to understand some of the things that had happened. The other thing that occurred to me was, a neighbor ended up talking to my mom about this program called Inroads. And they were, sort of the classic a voluntary affirmative
Right.
action. Let's tag some students, who do well or what have you. And, we went to these Saturday, enrichment kinds of
Right.
courses and
Right.
so forth. So they're trying to build a Black bourgeoisie.
Right.
They're not quite as militant about that task as like Jack and Jill, for example, because they didn't have the same kind of class consciousness, oddly.
Did they have the same type of class positioning, or
Um,
are they more middle class than
it was
upper middle class?
more middle class than elite, right?
Okay,
And so,
yeah, they're straight aspirational.
right,
Yeah,
right. And so, so they, with their whole, because they're corporate driven, right? And so, um, their thing was, we'll give you this training, this supplemental training, and then we will connect you as a student to internships at companies. So that's what I did in my summers. So I worked for Brown Shoe Company in Clayton.
hmm.
And for those of you who have, why would you know anything about shoes? But shoe manufacturing is light manufacturing. It's exactly
Right.
like what happens in automobiles, just at a much, much smaller
On
scale,
the scale.
right?
Yeah, straight
Um,
assembly line. That's
yeah,
also the rubber factory where I worked. It's the same assembly line. Oh yeah,
exactly.
it's Taylorism, as they
Yes,
call it, scientific management.
absolutely. Right, absolutely. So while I think I started with Inroads as a junior in high school, and you don't get your internship until you are a high school senior, like that summer after you graduate, and
Right.
then while you're in college. Um, and so, I began working at Brown because they never had any intern of any kind.
Mm.
And so I was the very first student intern that they ever had. They kind of didn't know what to do with me. So interestingly, I start at Mizzou, um, and I start working at Brown during the summers. My sophomore year at Mizzou, I take a Black History course with Sundiata Cha-Jua.
Yeah.
And now I'm beginning to get more vocabulary. So, prior to taking your class, I'd taken a sociology course. So I took Daniels and that Black literature class that Walter Daniels.
No. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I took that. Everybody took that, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you had to, right? But I took the sociology class, and now at the same time,
Who taught the
I'm working.
sociology class?
It was an adjunct, a guy named Mac.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he was like maybe a graduate student somewhere.
Okay.
Um, I took his sociology course, and I took another one that was taught by I can't remember her name, but she did gender stuff, and so she had me reading about the West Virginia coal mines. I didn't know anything about that, right? So I was starting to begin to get a vocabulary that could make my life make sense. There was because I had so much
Right.
transition.
Right.
There was a way that
Right.
my life didn't make sense is maybe the wrong way to phrase it. My life wasn't like anybody else's,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so I needed a way to just to begin to understand it. And so I was starting to get tools while at the same time I'm at this company and I'm seeing corporate capitalism unfold in real time,
Yeah.
right? Because I was the first intern, and at that point, when I started, I was the only intern, and then they got some more. They would just let me go to stuff. So I was in like high level meetings where real decisions were being made about things
Oh.
because, well, why wouldn't you have the intern in there? Right? There were people who had
Yeah. Yeah.
titles who couldn't go to those meetings, but I got to go to them. Right. And
Damn.
so I'm seeing like the president of
Oh, you saw crime up
up
close.
close, right? I mean, I saw a president, I saw the day where a vice president who had told those people that he was not leaving for a competitor, leave for that competitor, right? I saw like that kind of politics play itself out. all the way down to mundane stuff like how do they figure out what price to charge for a pair of shoes? Right? Like it ain't as complicated as you may think. Right? It's just a bunch of dudes sitting around at a table talking like, I think this shoe should retail for $69.99, right? Like, so I'm seeing all of these things play out, like, and so I'm super engaged in what I'm learning, not in my marketing classes, but in your classes, and in like being an activist on campus because people are talking about capitalism and I'm kind of seeing it.
Yeah.
Right? And I always had this interest in inequality because inequality made my life make sense. And
Right.
so this is kind of how I end up on this path. I ended up going to graduate school because a couple things happened. I was set to take a job in marketing. For them, they do sales because I went through the sales training program with college graduates. So I'm in school, but I'm doing the same training that the full-time college graduate employees go through. So, I'm set to take a territory.
Right.
And because it's St. Louis, they eventually got at least two more Black interns after me.
Yeah.
And this one white dude was, of course, incensed by this. I'll never forget because we all have a guy with a different name. My guy was Denny. And Denny was notorious for harassing the interns. So it was me. You may remember Tim Smith, because Tim went to Mizzou. So Tim came after me. And so whenever we were kind of in the open office area, Denny would make it his business. He was a junior vice president. He'd make it his business to come by and smack us on the back real hard. Kind of like it's supposed to be jovial, but he was real heavy-handed. He wanted to make sure you felt it. And he did the classic thing with me one day. I worked for my supervisor was out of town, and we had some merchandise that we use for photo shoots or what have you in the office. And he asked for one of the jackets because he thought, his wife would love to have it. And I'm like, hey man, ain't nothing to me. I'll wait until Joe gets back and I'll ask her. And I'm not asking Joe, I'm asking you, right? So he's trying to get me to steal the merchandise so he can get me fired, right? But, my mama didn't raise no fools. So I'm like, well, it's not my decision to make. And so he's going to stare me down about this. So, I didn't do it. I'm not an idiot. But it occurred to me at that moment that I had no leverage in this place. I can't do anything about this idiot trying to get me fired. So I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll go to graduate school and at least I'll get some letters behind my name. Where I can at least get another job if these assholes get me fired, right?
Right.
And around that time, my senior year, I remember talking to you specifically because the other thing that I considered was becoming a historian. And I remember you saying, well, you could do that, but we don't have people with your kind of sensibility working in the area that you're working in. So maybe just do that. And that's kind of what put me on the path to graduate school, and, eventually becoming an academic. But Mizzou is the place that I have to say I have a love-hate relationship with it, as I'm sure you do. Maybe
Absolutely.
Jesse. But
they did say they were going to kill me.
Right. But, like that 88 to 92 period at
that was hot.
It was special, right? It was just special. And so, I just got reared in a particular way. My intellectual development is something that I owe to that place at that time. And so that's kind of why I do what I do.
But, you were, of course, the most special, but there was a special group of folk that came out of that small group of Black students at Missouri, the number of PhDs that came out of you guys from, what was it, Students for Social Change.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we got like maybe 6 PhDs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Couple of
And let me tell you, to your
lawyers, a
audience,
principal.
I was not the most special. I was one of them, but we had some rough riders in that group. Let me tell you, Minka was there,
Yeah.
Clarence, C. Lang was there. We had all kinds of folks come through there, but it was like
Oh,
Cha-Jua was there, Helen was there, Helen Neville was there, Dave Roediger was there, Gene Allman was there, Sharon Welch, Ted Kodacek, Junkie Choi, kind of, came,
yeah.
Steve Ferguson came through, right? We had people.
Yeah. No, we produced some folk.
Yeah, we
No doubt
ain't no
about
doubt.
that.
Hmm.
No doubt about that. And then we did the book, Race
Right, right.
Struggles.
I mean,
Right?
I look at
Yeah,
that
yeah,
fondly. There
yeah.
are not many
No.
people who could say that. So, like it was a formative time, and it was, I mean, I think it was the institution and the people who were the institution, obviously, that they're doing the most instrumental things, right? Like they are helping me really begin to think and see the world like a scholar, so that by the time I got to school, it all, I already got it, right? I wasn't learning how to be a scholar. I was learning how to be a better scholar when I got there. But also just that period of American history, you know,
Yeah.
um, was I still don't have great adjectives for it. I so appreciate Elizabeth Hinton's book that
Mm,
kind of investigates that period, because it's like all of the things that happened. I had forgotten how much
yeah.
racial violence there was in America, during that Reagan, Bush, Clinton.
Yes.
That stretch was wild in American history.
But I would say that in the 20th century, certainly after the 60s, that period has been formative for the moment we're in now.
Yeah,
No doubt
yeah.
about it.
Hmm.
No doubt about it. And what I hope is that just like a cadre, several cadres came out of those places, that these conditions being quite similar will produce others. But I want to go to your research for a
Sure.
moment, and I particularly want to revisit something that we discussed 4 years or 4 months ago.
Hmm.
But before I get there, I want to kind of work through it. So you recently published a major review of the study of race in consumer research,
Hmm.
past, present, and future. So I want you to you guys develop a tripartite analytical framework that
Hmm.
deals with one, racial structuring of consumption
Hmm.
and consumer markets; two, consumer navigation of those markets,
Hmm.
of those racialized markets; and
Hmm.
then three, the active piece, the action piece, consumer resistance and advocacy moments.
Hmm.
So how does what we call race structure consumption, by which you mean purchase or acquisition of goods and services and consumer markets?
Hmm. That's an interesting one, and I've done some even more recent work that's about ready to go to a journal on this. And what's interesting is to look at it with a historical sensibility.
Mhm.
Um, on the one hand, what we are given, because so often economists kind of dominate the discussion about the economy, um, they dehistoricize it, right? Like that's kind of
Yeah,
not the thing. Not all of them do, but that is
but almost
prominent.
all of them
Yeah,
do.
yeah. Right. But in truth, markets are themselves historical things, right? Like
Yeah.
people have always exchanged goods and services that precedes capitalism, and it will be here after capitalism is
Right.
gone. Um, but what's crucial is that markets develop in a place, under particular kinds of rules of exchange. And certainly in what became the United States, but even prior to that, the notion of exchange was itself, of course, racialized.
Hmm.
Because the most formal markets, they have to operate under a legal regime. What matters here is that Black people were, of course, defined out of the legal protections that are supposed to go with markets. Enslaved people could not contract, of course, in a way where those contracts had standing in any
Right.
court, right? So you start with that at the most basic level. But even I would also add to that, because the United States, it's not merely racist, but it is also a settler colony. Um, you know, Many of the market relations that involve not just the planter class, but involve everyday people, also take place with the indigenous population, and changing the rules of the game on those folks, overfishing in excess of contractually agreed upon limits, and having that lead to like absolute slaughter. These things are all worked into markets from the very first day. If we look back even at the
Mhm.
Reconstruction amendments, like the last one that goes through, right, is about so-called public accommodations, right, and it is about kind of clearing the ground of the sort of racist norms that took place in markets, and so um, because markets are predicated on exchange, which are fundamentally social encounters, you always have this issue where social encounters are themselves structured by the racial regime that you are in. And so much of the point that we want to make there is that you can't just say, but for the discrimination of a few people. No, the market as an institution, right, is created and sustained in a way that privileges the claims that whites make on property, right? Now, what I will go to are,
Dave,
go ahead.
I got this is a supplemental question I want you to deal with.
Yeah,
If my granddaughter takes an economic class at a college today,
yeah.
she's going to be introduced to the idea that it's a free market. And you just told me that the market is built in, structured.
Hmm.
Its lifeblood is racialization because we live in a racialized society.
Hmm.
Why get away with teaching what is clearly a myth?
Well, let me begin by saying that ain't the only myth, right? Like, she's got
Yeah.
some graphs about supply and demand and how they're supposed to be connected that even economists agree is a polite fiction, right? Um, so it's worth saying that oh, just as a quick aside, because I have to tell you this. So Walter Johnson's book about St. Louis, Broken Heart of America. Um, Walter's a historian at
Well,
Harvard.
no. You know that Walter's father taught sociology at Missouri.
He taught econ at Mizzou
He taught
because
econ, yeah.
he taught me econ at Mizzou.
Okay.
That's how old I am, right?
Yeah. For some reason, I thought he was a rural sociologist,
No,
but no, he
no,
was an
he was an
economist.
economist, man.
Yeah, yeah.
And my impression is that a pretty right wing one, actually.
Oh, what do you mean? Your impression? Not only was he a pretty right wing one, but that econ department, those crazy white boys over there, at one point they smeared shit. I mean feces on the door of the chair. They had wild stuff going on in Missouri's econ department.
Okay.
The free
That's all that I knew
marketers.
about. Yeah, man. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, um, one of the interesting things is that on the one hand, what economists can be very good at is, narrowing our focus on a particular thing, right? Now, done to excess, what you get is a kind of reductionism. And so, in some sense, it's not surprising that you get race reductionism because reductionism is pretty prevalent in their thinking, right? Kind of as a general rule. And so, what I'd say is that the sort of official story in econ on racism and discrimination is that, that it's a matter of taste.
Yeah.
And so there are people who maybe psychologically have negative attitudes, and so they will choose to discriminate, and that, kind of the Gary Becker, who's kind of on their Mount Rushmore, has argued, this is going back into the 70s. Gary Becker argues that, well, if people have a taste for or people have a taste for discrimination, eventually
Mm-hmm.
they're going to have to pay a price premium
Right.
For that. Now, what's interesting is to say that that's not wrong. That's not incorrect. That in many markets, this does actually show up, and it does actually this way. But just like supply and demand don't always have the kind of relationship that they claim that it does, we know that this view of discrimination is insufficient, right, to explain
Right.
much of what goes on. And I'll just say, in some more recent work that I've been doing with a colleague in sociology, when we're going to publish over there, we do sort of look at kind of, well, what is the rest of it? And our argument is effectively that the role that racism plays in, well, we'll say U.S. markets, because we think we're on the most solid ground there. The central role that it plays is extraction. So just like extraction of materials from the ground in colonial setups, you have financial extraction.
What we call a black tax.
Yeah, the black tax. And then the other thing is the sort of status component to that. So there are some actors who are in it and they get paid directly. And I think that aligns fairly nicely with kind of a standard Marxist sort of argument. But the other piece that I think that gets missed is the kind of status that goes on through sometimes exclusion or other times predatory forms of inclusion. That this is also a thing that we see in markets that is not, it's racism that is not strictly discrimination, right? And so, the simplest one is housing segregation. People will take less money from a white family, right? Like they will do the thing that Becker has said, right? They'll take less money from a black family to keep that neighborhood white because of the status penalty that they might otherwise pay. We saw that, with the claims of blockbusting and so forth. And so this extraction process involves both these pieces, your black tax, but also the status stuff. And so what we try to do is kind of map all of it out, right, across a number of dimensions.
Okay. So now, I also kind of asked you this question, and I want to revisit it because it's been nearly 5 years, right? So one of the things we talked about in 2021 was that the study of consumption or consumer behavior is central to human activity, as you just discussed, right? Precedes capitalism and will exist after capitalism. And China strongly suggests that to us, right? And part of this is being human. But it's become, as study of consumption and consumer behavior become more or less incorporated in the transdiscipline of Black Africana studies.
Has it been, or how can it be?
Well, I'm trying to get the historical grounding. Is it more prevalent, or is it about the same, or is it less? Because that gives us an indication, right?
Yeah.
If political economy is not being studied in the field, then what is, right?
So, here's how I think I would try to manage that question because I mean, in some sense, it's an empirical one, right? And
Right.
so, like the simplest answer is I don't know. Here, but what I feel confident in saying is that um, people will always end up dealing with consumption because consumption is a part of everything. The question is about the tools that you bring for dealing with it. And so what I feel confident in saying is that in a lot of places, consumers and consumption are dealt with using tools that are quite naive, right? And so
Mhm.
even people who are quite critical of maybe the kind of work that economists do, they often make the same kind of basic
Mhm.
supply and demand assumptions. They kind of really don't know how corporations work, like who they target and why. So let me give you an example. Um, Many people will look at a company like Nike and think that Nike targets Black kids. And I would say, not really.
Yeah.
Nike uses Black culture,
Culture.
right? It's an
Yeah.
input into their communications, it's an input into lots of things that they do, but their target is the so-called general or mass market.
Right. No.
And that's not like a minor point. That really matters for kind of how you end up conducting analysis. Because if you think that what's
Yeah.
going on is targeting, you're often looking at the wrong stuff. And so that I would say kind of hasn't changed. I mean, like this, I don't mind saying at all. Like someone even did an analysis of all of the journals that are connected to American Sociological Association. So it was
Okay.
in Soc. And so obviously many of them are social but it's multidisciplinary. So there are some econ journals that are also connected to the
Hmm. Hmm.
ASA, to poli sci and so forth, and Journal of Consumer Research, which is arguably the best journal in our field. Um, was like the lowest on the status rung. It's like over a
Really?
hundred journals or something. And I think they looked at like impact factor and like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
citations and
Well,
stuff like that.
the field is small, and
Yeah,
that's always going to hurt you in terms of
right,
impact factor.
right.
But I want to give where I was trying to go is this:
Hmm.
at the University of Illinois,
Hmm.
and I retired after being here 25 years,
Hmm.
teaching here 25 years, and there was never a course in economics that focused on the Black population. There was never a course in Black studies that focused on the economic condition and situation of Black folk. So that's what
Hmm.
I was trying to
Oh
get
yeah.
at.
Oh yeah.
Uh, are folks in Black studies learning economics?
No, that is not my
Okay.
impression when I talk to not
Yeah.
my impression at all when I talk to folks. I think they end up talking about things that happen. Like because if you're thinking
Yeah.
about do work on prisons, that's consumption through and through, man. Like there's like
But the
everything that
people who
happens in
work
that
on
joint is
prisons don't,
privatized.
well, the people who work on prisons don't work on the ways in which economic discrimination functions in a prison, right? They work on the myth that the prison population are exploited workers,
Hmm.
which is something you really can't sustain. As someone said, there's only about 2 million folks in the prison. You're not running an
Right,
economy
right,
off of that, right?
right.
But they're not looking at the ways in which these rural towns get prisons, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
since there's a local economic impact factor,
Hmm.
there's an expectation that they will get their sheets and
Hmm.
pillowcases
Right.
and stuff from the local community
Hmm.
that lifts up then these small all white rural communities off the backs of Black folks who are incarcerated. That's where the
Right.
economic piece is coming in,
Yeah.
not in labor exploitation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Which is these are forms of extraction, right? Which is kind of, hey, like this is why Walter Rodney pointed us in that direction, many
Yes.
years ago, right? So I will say this: we actually, there's a brother, he graduated from UIC. I want to say his name is John Benton. That just had a book come out that is exactly about this. And one of the things that he talked about
Good.
in the
Good.
talk, yeah,
Good.
one of the things he talked about was how many of these towns are also rural Black towns. And so,
Mm.
that is also one of the things that we have not sort of come to grips with.
Yeah.
That in rural America,
Yeah.
period, there is also this substantial disinvestment.
And,
But prisons, and interestingly enough, at the end of his talk, he talked about data centers becoming kind of the new thing in some of these
mm-hmm.
places, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that these are effectively the only ways to do kind of small scale regional planning, right? Like these are the only entities that might potentially come and locate in places
Mm-hmm.
like this, and how they, in fact, end up politically mobilizing against things that would lower the prison population,
Right.
right?
Right.
And he's
Oh,
kind of like,
absolutely.
right, and he's like, we
Yeah.
have to kind of come to grips with those politics, and sort of find ways to
Yeah.
figure out how everybody can get their needs met here without increasing the prison population. But yeah,
No,
so
absolutely. So one of
yeah.
the things I want to raise just in that regard is this question of how we shift the politics. There at least in Illinois, there was a move to build prisons in the cities
Hmm.
as opposed to in these rural communities. But here's a data point for you.
Hmm.
20% of the nearly 50 million black folk in the United States right now live in majority black towns
Hmm.
and cities, with overwhelmingly being in very small communities.
Hmm.
That's 1 in 5.
Hmm.
That's a hell of a transition from the 70s.
Hmm. 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 um well, so one of the interesting things is, kind of like the engines that are driving that are probably
Mm.
multiple, right?
Right,
So,
right,
so one is that um, you've got a lot of, the so-called reverse migration, coming
right.
back to the South, right? So people are voluntarily moving back to, the Carolinas, and
Well, would you say voluntarily? I mean, in
well,
the
that's
sense
the
that
other thing.
gentrification,
Yeah.
uh,
See,
the
that's the other
rising
engine.
rents has pushing folks
Yeah,
out of the
the
cities.
city have depopulated
Yeah,
because of these other drivers. So I think both of these things are happening, and I think it's crucial to understand that you have these twin engines that are working at the same
yeah,
time, often on the same kind of population, right? And so, and there are obviously class dimensions to this,
yeah, yeah,
because I don't care where you migrate, migration is always highly selective, right? And
yeah,
so this notion of kind of where people end up, kind of why and how, and then also kind of like who stays because they are anchored
yeah,
there,
right,
or
right.
because they cannot leave,
Okay, not leave.
right? So,
In our case, also, who
hmm.
ends up, as black folks have been pushed out of Chicago,
Hmm.
who ends up in the south suburbs as opposed to the Atlanta
Right.
suburbs? Right.
Exactly. Right. And so, one of, and I don't want to, speak out of turn here, because there are, I'm sure, people who are looking at exactly this. The question is, what engines of migration are leading people to where? Because it's one thing to say that 1 in 5 Black people are in a small town that's predominantly Black,
Yeah.
but that can describe somewhere in Prince George's County.
Right.
And it can also describe, places in, like Ypsilanti,
Yeah,
um, right?
absolutely.
Right. And so, so that's kind of the question. And then like, because markets are also very local, in many places, or it also is going to give us some information about what happens to them when they get where they're going, right? How do you get housing in the new place,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
Uh,
That's right.
because it's, Chicago is its own thing, and I moved up here from Columbia, South Carolina, where like the way you end up doing housing is different.
Yeah.
Um, and so, so now you move to a place like, so my wife is from Elgin, which has a lot of Black people in it, which is maybe 20 miles outside of Columbia proper, and it's pretty
Mhm.
rural. And a lot of people live in very substandard housing. So like
Oh, absolutely. In a lot of
rates of
those
something
rural
like
places.
homelessness are not necessarily super high, but what how people are living. They've been
Absolutely.
finding this stuff out about, because like a lot of Black people are moving to Phoenix, and then the outer parts
Yeah, they're in
of
the outer parts of Phoenix. They live in Phoenix.
and so bro, my
Yeah,
PhD is from University of Arizona. Like I did
yeah,
that thing. Black people in
yeah,
Arizona is a trip, man, because
yeah,
you talking about folks who literally have never seen Black people except for on TV. And the places that are outside, like really outside the general metro, like, man,
yeah,
you're not
yeah.
getting sanitation services. Like it's hard to get water, out to some of these places. And so, it's a different kind of experience.
No, no, no. The other piece, and then I want to kind of move on, but just kind of make this point is
Hmm.
that if you were to look at the old Black Belt nation from the 1890s and even from the
Right.
1930s,
Hmm.
if you were to plot out the the demography of the African American population,
Hmm.
it's pretty much looking like the old Black Belt nation with
Hmm.
these majority Black towns stretching from Maryland to Texas in the
Hmm.
same crescent format.
Hmm.
It's interesting development. So
Hmm.
here's the thing. I want to switch to universities, right?
Ooh.
We know that the wealthiest and most prestigious universities voted for Trump quicker than he probably wanted. They've now moved their assault to the public.
Mhm,
And so you're at University of Illinois, Chicago. I
mhm,
was at the University of Illinois, Champaign. Um, can you talk about what's happening with the publics in terms
sure.
of their response to the fascist,
Mhm,
racist, anti-DEI agenda?
mhm. Yeah, you know what? And let me do this too. Um, I'm employed by the University of Illinois, Chicago. I am not speaking on its behalf.
Duly noted that
I
this
am,
guest is not speaking for the universe. These are
thank
his own personal
you. These are my own
opinions
personal comments.
based on his lived experience. Okay.
Absolutely. Um, so here's the thing that I think has been interesting. So there are a couple of things that I think are instructive in terms of what's happening at Publix, because many of them have folded. Now, there are some who have at least tried to delay things, but I would not say that there are a lot of them that I know about currently. I've kind of heard some tales about some of the schools in California that are sort of held out. Um, but for the most part, the way that the administration, they've been less haphazard than they were in Trump 1.0. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the strategy has been to, the Doge thing was to go after grant funding.
Yeah.
So many of your, research oriented schools, they generate a lot of their revenue through grant funding, right? So
Yeah.
there's tuition dollars, which is what everyone focuses on, but for those of you who may not be familiar, and I don't do a lot of grant funded research, but the basic setup is that, you win an award to do a project and your university taxes that money, right? So you get
Indirect
millions,
costs is what they call it.
right?
And indirect costs can be 60%
Yes,
of your
indeed.
grant.
Right. That tax ain't just 10% anymore.
No.
It can be quite high. Now, the university's argument is that this is what keeps the lights on for everyone, right? And that the way that one writes grants, you try to kind of take that into account. And so what the administration has done, two things. One, they've targeted particular kinds of grants.
Right.
And UIC is a very large grant funded university. I think
Right.
the numbers I've heard from several people are that we bring in 500 plus million in grants, in federal grants, every year. So that's funding
Yeah, that's a lot of
salaries.
money.
That's a lot
Yeah.
of money, right? And so they have gone after anything that is quote unquote DEI related. That's the Doge thing. But the other piece that maybe I think got a little less press is that they've been pushing to have universities cap that indirect cost,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Absolutely. They did. I'm trying to think. Did they reduce it down to, I was going to say maybe 20,
15%. Was
15%?
15%
Yeah.
was the cap
Yeah.
that had been
Yeah.
discussed. Well, that move has basically disciplined many a university
Oh,
administrator, right? And so they are looking to kind of stay on the quote unquote right side of the law. So the way that has happened at many schools, cough cough, um, is that they have kind of what they've done is it has unleashed people in administrative positions to go hunting for things that they might think would run afoul of
oh,
the
absolutely.
Trump administration's directives. And so, at our school in October, the university administrators sent out a missive to a very select group of people, including deans and some program leaders and so forth, that said that the University of Illinois system has declared that race, gender, sexual orientation
Mhm.
will now no longer be a consideration in any student financial aid, in any hiring decisions, and
Yeah.
in promotion and tenure. And so, we have been waging a battle on our campus and with the system over this since that time. That has consisted of multiple meetings with both local administrators and representatives of the U of I system.
System.
And the thing that has been interesting in terms of tactically how it's played out is that, and I've heard that this has been repeated at a number of schools, so I know that
Mm.
there is some kind of consulting firm
Mm.
that has just sort of
Yeah.
propagated this approach. So what they're doing is, they're making a grandiose claim to make sure that they are on the right side of the Trump administration. Hey, we're not considering race. But then they are saying to faculty and local administrators, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you can
Yeah.
keep on doing whatever you were doing.
But
Now, of
change
course,
the name.
yeah, we'll change the name. Of course, in practice, once you invite that, they believe that, or they are claiming that what they are doing is what's called malicious compliance. So they're sort of complying with the Trump administration directives, but they're really undermining them. In
That's what
truth,
they say they're doing.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's not much undermining. And so they have been cutting things, they have been making real material changes in particularly any kind of targeted program. So for example, I'm sure Champaign-Urbana has one of these, but we have a targeted program in education for Black and brown males because we're trying to increase their representation
Yeah.
among teachers, right?
Yeah.
And that program was eliminated.
Yeah.
Um, Now, what they're doing is that they are shifting blame and they are not writing anything down.
Yeah.
So the system is saying we didn't tell your local administrators to cut anything or change any names. Local administrators are saying yes, they did. And so right now, folks who are opposing this are kind of caught in this do loop, where
Hmm.
no one's taking responsibility for anything. Now, I've come to understand that part of the reason for that not only to maybe sow confusion, but it is also to avoid having to put anything in a court deposition,
Yeah.
because you have
There's a lot of that. They
yeah,
don't want reports. In some
yeah,
places, they just give us your budget. We don't want anything that can be investigated.
right.
Now where this is, of course, reached its, beyond the Ivies,
Mm-hmm.
um, Texas, they abolished the Black Studies Department. And
Mm-hmm.
for a long time, that Texas Black Studies Department in their PhD program was considered one of the safest units, right? Because a number of their chairs had moved into the dean's office and into
Mm-hmm.
the provost's office,
Mm-hmm.
and they just closed it.
Yeah.
Florida, it's rough what they do in the Black Studies there, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't, I
And they
think
started in Florida
Illinois,
years ago, right?
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that attack, and on the one hand, Trump's a low level intelligence person with no human emotions,
Mm-hmm.
sociopath. Well, psychopath. He's born fucked up. It wasn't through something that happened in his
Right.
life. He came here like that. Um, but beyond him and and what he's about,
Mm-hmm.
this system was ready for this moment.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
um,
I have some thoughts
it,
on
it
that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. In some ways, the groundwork was laid before they got the Project 2025 thing.
Mm-hmm.
I always knew they were coming for Black studies
Mm-hmm.
because they have to come forward, and they have to come for education because the resistance, right? They've suppressed the unions to where
Mm-hmm.
they represent only 10% of the population. So
Mm-hmm.
when you look at these large demonstrations, what's the common denominator in terms of where these people come from? They took a women's studies class. They came
Right.
from Black studies. They
Right.
came from
Right.
Latin
Right.
studies. They came from Asian American studies.
Right.
So of course they were always going to come for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't, as Miles said, we weren't fish in the sea. We didn't swim in the community and
Mm-hmm.
build the strong community ties that would allow us to weather the storm. But your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I mean, I think that's a fair criticism. I will also say it might not have saved us anyway. Like we should have done those
Yeah,
things because they are sort of meritorious on their own. Um, I would say that in many ways, what has been intriguing about this moment is not sort of the centrality of kind of fascism. It
yeah,
has
it's
been that
fashion.
the appetite for it is so diffused,
Yes.
right? So it's Trump is in many ways, like he's the signal figure, and fascism always has to have a guy.
Mhm.
But really the success of this moment and what's great about it just in terms of historical analysis that we can really compare this moment to the 2016 moment, right? And they're
Mhm.
very different.
That's
um
right.
and the difference is not just about what's happening in DC, though what is happening there is different. What's different about this moment is the extent to which, and let's just keep it a buck, among whites in the United States, the appetite for fascism has
Yeah,
just been high, right? Like,
that's right.
so I will say this about universities, and then maybe expand the scope a little bit. Um, what the Trump Department of Ed has done, they've had their direct fire on universities, but I would say much of the damage has actually been done locally. So
Public schools, absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
even within the scope of higher ed, like the real damage to programs has not come from the DOE, and some of it hasn't even come from the highest level of administrators. What the Trump administration has done is they have freed the middle level manager types to wreak havoc on programs.
Mm,
So, why is it that certain programs are getting targeted? Like they didn't find all of that stuff on AI. Like, no, they got
right.
ratted out, right? Like that's what happened in a lot of these places. And so what they did, the DOE has done is that they have signaled to these campuses that, the surveillance state is open.
Hmm.
And anybody who wants to rat out these programs, blah blah blah, like the time is now. Some
Yeah,
of those
yeah.
courses have been there on campus, but some of them are also these local kind of Moms for Liberty type activist groups.
Oh no,
And
Turning Point USA. That's their whole thing.
yeah, TPA,
That's
all
their
that.
whole thing.
So
Yeah,
this has
yeah.
been,
That's their
as we
whole thing.
know, this has been going on with Black faculty, especially, but other
Yeah.
faculty of color at these universities for a long time. And so that level of institutional leverage was being built before the DOE did
Hmm.
any of this stuff. And so when you
That's true.
say like, we made universities ready for this, we absolutely did. And so even when these administrators are being truthful in the sense that I do think some of them really do believe that they're doing malicious compliance,
Yeah.
but no, all they're really doing is setting things up so that other nefarious actors now
Mhm.
have a clear field to play
That's
in.
right. That's right.
So
That's all they're
Texas,
doing.
Texas is a great example because do you know this the Tom Alter story? So
The
he's a
guy that got
radical,
fired.
yeah, the guy that
Yeah,
got
yeah,
fired,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
So with Alter, what's crucial is that so he goes to a socialism conference. He's clearly like not even trying to represent the university. He's talking about stuff that he has done, and in fact, the comments that basically got him fired were a hot mic during the break.
Mm,
All of this stuff was evident. Tom's a UIC grad, by the way. Um,
okay.
and so, but what's crucial and the thing that it didn't even appear in all the stories that I read is that um, this Texas legislature basically dissolved the faculty union, or the faculty senate, excuse me,
Oh,
not faculty union,
it
the
is
faculty
out the
senate.
faculty senate.
Yes.
Wow.
So statewide, they dissolved the faculty senate. So part of what has prepared universities for this moment has been this much longer attack on promotion and tenure,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And so they have gone after these faculty senates. And here's what, for those of you who are not in higher ed, here's why that matters. Tom Alter was a tenured professor. He's an associate with tenure at Texas State. It doesn't mean that you can't get fired. I actually had a faculty colleague who murdered his wife and three other people, and they fired him the next day
Yeah,
for
yeah,
not showing up
yeah.
for work. Right, so you can be fired, right? Like
Fired, right. But
you
it's hella rare.
it's rare because you have to be fired for cause. It can't
Right.
be, we're looking for new blood or like they can't do that. They have to fire you for cause. So, when they do want to get rid of you, if you're a tenured faculty and they're saying like, hey, you did something untoward, you have to go through a process that is kind of like impeachment, like, right?
Right.
And that happens before the faculty senate. Well, the state of Texas dissolved that Senate, which left the president of the university in charge. He fires the
Mm,
guy. The guy sues for an injunction. He gets the injunction from a judge, but then he has to go. The judge says there's no due process here, so has to go back to a kangaroo court of the presiding president.
yeah.
Right? So he goes back before the same guy who fired him. Well, this kind of institutional mayhem has been let loose in a lot of states. They'd
Mhm.
already killed black studies in Florida like 5 years
Yeah.
ago,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so, at a moment where the DOE then comes in and says, well, we're taking all the guardrails off. And literally in Florida and in some other states, part of that has involved encouraging people to snitch on colleagues, to look for quote
Mhm.
unquote DEI under every nook and
Yeah.
cranny. And so that's why we are here at this moment with this particular thing.
Yeah. And we're going to have to realize that we got to build a united front
We really
amongst
do.
these professional organizations
Hmm.
to take this on. I want to move to the biggest thing happening in the world,
Hmm.
and that is the fact that Trump thinks it's the 1890s. And he's doing the age of imperialism.
Hmm.
You know, that's how he's going to make America great again. So
Yeah.
between 1893 and 1899, the U.S. took Hawaii, the Philippines,
Hmm.
and Puerto Rico. The robber baron monopolist financial capital, as Lenin and Du Bois tells us,
Hmm.
launched the scramble for Africa that lead us directly into the First World War. Trump has taken portions of Venezuela.
Hmm.
He's lusting after Cuba and assaulting Iran as we sit here today. So even though the U.S. is now a declining empire as opposed to in the 1890s, it's a rising empire. What difference does that make in this new MAGA imperialism?
Hmm. Wow. You know, in the main, right, if we go back to our big three, right, land, labor, and capital,
Yeah.
um, right. So one of the stories that I think kind of got lost in the Greenland episode was the centrality of a particular kind of mineral that was there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and so one of the forces that is at the root of all of this, um, are one of those forces is our tech overlords, right? So,
And I was going to say, that's what's different, not only from the
mhm,
1890s, but it's also what's different from the 1980s. The
yeah,
financialized
mhm,
sector was in
mhm,
control. The tech barons are more vicious, more primitive accumulationists,
mhm, mhm.
more criminal
Anti-human,
and
anti-humanists
anti-human.
at their
They would
core.
say transhuman would be their argument. Yeah.
Right, 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 right. Um, so, so what you have is this moment where, you have a set of interests that are very aligned on being able to control key points in the supply chain. I mean, that is as old school
Yeah.
colonialism kind of as you can get. And because many of them haven't, read anything, they are sort of just they're running that playbook, right? And so
Right.
I think that's part of what we're seeing. But the other interesting thing is that in the last few weeks, boy, some of these Bush era neoconservatives have risen from the grave, to cheerlead this war on. Now,
Oh
many of them
yeah.
have they've slunk back into their corners because it's not going well.
Right.
Um, but they absolutely were. Man, I saw a picture of Condoleezza Rice the other day,
The one when she
palling
went
it
to
up
the
with
went to the White House.
yeah, palling it up with
Yeah.
Trump. It was just like,
Oh yeah.
damn, brother, I thought she was dead. You know what I'm saying? Like, really?
Man,
um,
you know that only the good die young.
brother, you said something there, man. And so when she came up out of the woodwork, so some of this is also military adventurism.
Yeah.
I think
And
that's a
some of it
real
is they done built some shit and they need to try it out. I mean, it's cynical as hell.
right.
But they
But
didn't hit
it's
a,
like,
as the South Africans say, they hit a rock.
right. Like
They didn't
that
hit a
is the
rock.
part that has gone the most poorly. Well, you know what? I can't even say the most poorly because it's like I don't know how they're going to get a hold of all these resources they think they're going to get a hold of.
Yeah.
And then the adventurism part has not gone particularly well either. Um, I mean, America has enough um, resources to sort of never have to admit failure. But they are quickly getting to the point where even that part's going to be hard to play off.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Israel might not be here in the next generation. They
Ooh,
get,
yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
not
yeah.
doing what they're doing. That's not in their current iteration.
That's
That's for
right.
doggone sure. Yeah, I mean, hey, obviously that thing has become a mess, and again, I try to speak on where I have some expertise, but there are some
Yeah,
things that are just achingly obvious. Um, they have kind of pushed this thing to the brink in a way that lots of other people in the world have simply said, we can't be a part of this because there's no plausible deniability. There's no
that's
exit
right.
from this that allows us any grace, right? And so,
Nor can we stop. If
yeah,
we go
right,
down
right,
this
right, right,
road, we got to keep this thing going.
right.
So here's what I was about what I see as a blatant failure. Um, there's an emphasis, and I'll just say Ibram Kendi's new book, where he's talking about great replacement theory
Hmm.
and making an argument that that's what's driving this.
Hmm.
That's a rationalization, but we got to bring the political economy back. As you
Hmm.
said, labor,
Yeah,
land,
man, labor and capital.
and
Mhm,
capital. We got to get back to political economy and explain this, as you say, the supply chain.
mhm,
Rare earth minerals is
mhm,
what they're after. The control of the remaining oil,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Because these oligarchs, they don't want to go to wind and solar.
mhm.
You know,
They
because
really
the
don't.
oil bears are still part of that group,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Um, so until we get back to political economy, we can't keep going with these idealist interpretations of
Mhm,
reality.
mhm.
We got to get to the root of
Right,
this thing, and it
right,
is political economy.
right. And I think there's a way that, like, there's a role for great replacement. As you said,
Yeah,
it's post hoc justification, and it's a post hoc justification that is prevalent among certain kinds of people, but not everybody who is involved in this, right? So,
right.
like there's a role for it, but it's not
It's not
driving the
leading. It can't
process.
lead the
Yeah,
analysis.
yeah, it doesn't lead the
Yeah,
analysis, right?
yeah.
There are particular kinds of actors who have an interest in these places, and let's not forget the real estate developers,
Thank
who
you.
have a
They
role.
may be the worst criminals on the planet.
There's a thing that I often say, that especially in local politics, like whatever is bad that is happening where you live, if you look hard enough, you will find that real estate development is at the root, somewhere, man. It is
Absolutely.
like everything
Absolutely.
that happens
Oh,
that's awful in municipal politics. Real estate development is really at the bottom of it. And in a lot of places, they are the they are the local political power.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, absolutely.
you know what I
I mean,
mean?
look, and if they're not the local political power, they are the force behind the corruption of the local political power, such
Yeah,
that TIF money is just a
yeah,
gift to this
yeah,
group of
yeah.
criminals. We are
Right,
paying them to rob us blind.
right. Yeah, you know how
Gentrification, yeah.
and during election season, they send you the big cards in the mail,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
mailers or what have you. I will take it out the mailbox. I'll look at the back to see if it's been sponsored by the Realtors Association,
Yeah,
right? Like that's all I need to know. Like that,
yeah.
right? That's all I don't care what else it says on there. If you're getting money from the realtors, you
Which
probably
is
are not a friend of mine.
absolutely certainly not a friend of my people.
Right. Oof,
Absolutely
oof.
not.
No, thank you.
Absolutely not.
Hmm.
So, Dave, we've come to that moment.
Hmm.
Um, Technically, I try and be sharp at 8:30, but I don't have my producer here to be saying nasty things to me about ending on time. So we went over a bit. We're going to keep going about 15 minutes, but I want to bring to a conclusion uh, our discussion, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Okay.
So, do you have any summatory comments or any announcements that you'd like to make before we go to the chat?
Um, you know, so the only thing I'll pump right now, I have a piece that just came out where we look at um the social service environment for people who are in poverty, right? So it's called
Hmm.
Alice in Wonderland, right? So how do people who are impoverished, who are trying to get resources, navigate the social environment that they are in to try to acquire those resources? One of the things that we sort of came across, and this one I'll say, like, I worked with a large group of co-authors. We do not all share the same politics, but good folk. And one of the things that we said was that what no one had really done was just kind of map out where things are in
Hmm.
social space, so to speak, right? So you're doing one thing for housing, another thing for food, another thing for energy, and so forth, right? And that kind of administrative burden is there. I mean, it's part of what keeps people in poverty. I mean, we know what the big causes are, but we wanted to look at like the actual shape of the environment and the role that it's also playing. That just came out in the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing in kind of a preprint version.
Okay,
But that's one that I will send you a link to. So if you have
please.
readers who are interested in checking it out, and that one, I will say that the source of pride for me in that one is that like that you don't have to be an academic to read that paper, right? So I
Oh,
think it's
great.
pretty approachable. So I would appreciate folks who are checking that out. So that's kind of the only thing that I'll plug for the time being. So let's get to Q&A if there's some.
Okay, so there's a question staring me in the face, and it's from Josh Ingram, a brilliant young activist working with Black Men Build. And
Okay.
his question is, what's one article, book, or series you'd recommend to a high school student to get a better grasp of the fundamentals of economics?
Ooh. Um. Okay. So I'm gonna try and recommend something that they will actually watch. Um, have them watch Andor on Disney Plus.
Ah,
Man,
okay, explain why.
so I don't know if you've seen the series, but A,
Yes,
it rocks. But also, B, I don't remember seeing anything that confronts colonialism, or I
yeah,
should say imperialism, really, and the way they do it, they work up from the bottom and then also down from the top. It is a masterpiece of television.
yeah.
But what's so cool about it is they actually situate the main character Andor in these different economies, right, at different points in time. So you see them kind of unfold. So you see him as a small child coming up in what is actually a planet that is the site of extraction.
Hmm.
It's this great scene where he's kind of looking out into the vast expanse of a planet that is being strip mined, right? And so you see the site of extraction. Then you see the same guy who, participates kind of in the underground economy. right? Like trying to, he's a bit of a hustler, trying to get paid, and so forth, right? Ends up connecting with, some folks who are
Resistance.
right, who are resistance, but they also doing a job, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like they robbing
Yeah,
the armory.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then you see like what they do so great. Like I think the best arc in the series is when he's in the prison. Because what you see is how there are moments and there are particular things for which um, both the capitalist class and the state can come together to prioritize prison labor to do a specific thing at a specific point in time, without that having to be a driver of the economy.
Hmm.
Um, but you see kind of the way that they use that labor at that moment, and they increase it when they have to. But that's a stand-in for kind of how immigration works in many of the
Mm.
so-called receiving nations, where they will incentivize immigrant laborers, right, to come for a particular thing, and then they will use them up and kind of spit them out. um and so, and then of course spoiler alert, you see that the thing that he's working on later is components that go into the Death Star, right? So it's connected to the military industrial complex. um but the thing that I would say that is the most critical about Andor, when thinking about just economies and how they work, they are fundamentally social engagements. Everything
Hmm.
in Andor is about relationships between people, and that's what an economy is. And we have to, if we're going to understand what an economy is, we have to start with those terms, right? Like that it is a set of relationships
Ship.
that you experience individually, but are also macro in their scope.
Right, right. Now, given that,
Hmm.
what if Josh says, I'm watching Andor,
Hmm.
I still want some
Right.
quick thing that
Yeah.
I can
Hmm.
read?
Yeah. That you can go
What
back
would
to.
you, that I can go back to?
Right. You know what? I would say probably the thing that I would recommend to anyone is Capital in the 21st Century. Um, I believe that's the Piketty
The
book.
Picnic is the Picnic. Now that's a 600-page book.
Right. And so you're not going to read it quickly, and you shouldn't. That is one that it breaks apart fairly
Mhm.
nicely. So there are
That
specific
is
things
true.
that you want to know about. Then like, so one of the things I should say, like, you don't always have to read the book cover to cover to get what you need out of it. Some
That's
books
right.
work really well as handbooks, and that one does. I've not read that thing cover to cover, but I've read parts of it and go back to parts of it pretty
Okay.
frequently.
Okay. Good. Good.
So don't be intimidated by the size.
Yeah, I was going to say, because if someone asked me about what book to read in history, I would go straight to the 18th Brumaire.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, because I
Mhm.
think that you learn how to analyze in real time using the historical materialist
Mhm.
framework from the
Mhm.
18th Brumaire. The other
Mhm.
thing I would say is watch the original Magnificent Seven.
Okay.
Right?
See, I've
If you're
never
talking
seen the
about
original.
in terms
I've
of
never seen Magnificent.
organization, in terms
Okay.
of organization, you want to learn to be an
Mhm.
organizer, watch
Mhm.
the Magnificent Seven.
Mhm.
Hell of a film for
Okay.
organizing. So I
Okay.
appreciate that you went to a film,
Mhm.
right? Because
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we really gonna have to communicate like that. Um, if you look at the reading scores for Black kids
Mhm.
in the third and excuse me, they do fourth and eighth grade.
Mhm.
You know, you need to get a handkerchief because you're gonna be crying. This shit is
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah, it's bad. My wife's a retired school teacher, so I've already heard, and it ain't just the Black kids either. Too,
No, it ain't.
it's
It ain't.
everybody, right?
This
Mm-hmm.
is the ironic thing is
Mm-hmm.
that, well, we knew it from being in Missouri, right? The white
Mm-hmm.
folks who were in the boot hill,
Mm-hmm.
they had the same ACT scores as the black kids in Kansas City and
Mhm.
St. Louis. So we
Absolutely.
knew that this thing was going to affect the
Right.
class
Right.
because we are the goddamn canary in the coal mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that I would say too, and this is kind of worth saying out loud. Um, I generally don't believe there are a lot of great, like, kind of overview texts on economics. Like, unless you're a graduate student, just for the general reader.
There's some neoclassical bullshit.
Well, yeah, right. And so, so it's like I tend not to recommend a lot of those things because, like, until you get the tools to cut through that nonsense, you may be
Right.
doing
Right.
more harm than good. There are some things that, like, some socialists have written, but,
Right.
like, generally speaking, you're better off thinking about, like, hey, if your interest is in labor, I can point you to some stuff on labor. If you're
Yeah.
interested
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
housing,
Yeah.
and so you kind of have to do it in context, and I can point you to some
Mm, okay. That
stuff.
makes sense. Now
Hmm.
we got a question um, from Pat Master Revelator, and it is the IRGC
Hmm.
has said that they will target destroy a Western banking institution corporation in retaliation for each assassination going forward.
I heard that.
Is there enough supply chain infrastructure in the region for this? I'm not sure what that question
Do
gets
you mean
at.
to survive that kind of thing? Um, so that's one of those things where I don't know if anyone can tell you what will happen if that transpires the way they're talking about it. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
you see kind of what the thing is. This was my understanding, at least, which could certainly be flawed, but my understanding is that this claim was made in the aftermath of the most recent round of assassinations,
Yeah,
with potentially preceding some peace talks or at least ceasefire talks. And that has been a strategy of the joint U.S. and Israeli forces, is to kind of talk about a potential ceasefire and then assassinate the people
that's right.
engaging in it, right? Like, that's in the news. That ain't me making that up. So the Iranians, of course, have made this counterclaim about what they're going to do. Um, and I think my response to that is I don't think anybody knows what will happen in the
Right.
aftermath of that. I would hesitate to make any kind of prediction, um, even about kind of how those companies might handle that sort of thing. I just don't. There's no playbook for that.
Well, I think the one thing that is clear that in the fascists move to do away with what they saw as a too liberal neoliberalism, which is a hell of a thing to
Thing
think
to say.
about, right?
Mhm, mhm.
That what they have ended up doing is putting the U.S. is done because now these oil producing countries are going to the UN and they're off the petrodollar. We are no longer, damn, I'm just a captive in this motherfucker.
Mhm.
they, they're done. Now that they're going off the dollar, they're done.
It's
And there's nothing they can do about that.
mhm. Yeah, that seems to be one of those things where it's not obvious that that even after the bombs stop falling, that there is any route back to petrodollars once people have changed the reserve currency, in which they are working. And so, this was already, at a moment where, the dollar was starting to weaken.
Yeah,
Um, and so, this is a problem, for this regime. Now, in some ways, in the short term, it may in fact yoke them even more to an a sort of
yeah,
regime
yeah.
change objective. Um, but I don't know that they can execute on that objective. You know, though like as many people have opined that at least some of them appear to have thought that this was going to be as easy as Venezuela. Um, that has simply turned out not to be true.
Yeah.
Um, you know, this is, you know, and it sucks, right? Because obviously, you know, people are dying, right? Like, you know, this
Yeah.
ain't,
Yeah.
you know, people are
No, this
dying.
is serious.
This
People are
is,
dying.
yeah. And so, you know, in all the, you know, and again, to the end of feeling like as a nation state, we have not only the right, but a calling to control key resources for our businesses, and then feeling like we have the political and military authority to dictate what will happen, you know, halfway across the damn world.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there's just a level of insanity to all of this that is difficult to wrap your head around until you understand something about American history and how
Yeah.
this has always been part of the story, right?
That's right.
It's varied in its intensity, but it, you know,
Absolutely.
but it has been a part of the
Primitive,
story the whole time.
primitive accumulation recurs. It ain't a
Hmm.
one-time
It's not a
thing.
one-time deal,
It is.
right?
It recurs throughout
Hmm.
capital. That's how
Hmm.
it sustains itself.
Right.
We should probably bring this to a
Let me ask you
conclusion.
this one
Oh, go
one
ahead.
quick thing because I think you might be interested. I would love to hear your take on it. So, have you heard the clip where you know Mark Lamont Hill is on Joe Budden's show and they're listening to a Jay Z clip, an interview with Jay Z? Have you heard
No,
this? This has
no,
been going
no,
around.
I
So this has been
haven't.
going around. So, you know, they end up in a discussion about capitalism. And so, you know, Mark goes on the show. I can't say I listen to clips occasionally when they come up on my social media, but I don't usually listen to Joe
Yeah,
Budden.
I don't either. Him
But
or
you know,
Mark
Mark goes
Lamont
on
here.
there
I don't
all the
even listen
time.
to either.
Yeah, you know, I listen to Mark sometimes. So you know, he goes on there. He's, you know, he's doing the good work. Like, you know, these guys are on there, and they are really defending, you know, Jay-Z's status as a billionaire. And it's like, hey, he's done all these things. He's helped put people on. You know, why are people saying there shouldn't be billionaires? Well, the question, you didn't see that clip, but the broader question is that there does seem to be in the zeitgeist, you know, more sentiment around, at least, if not, you know, moving towards socialism, at least a more critical stance towards capitalism, particularly among young people. You know, what should speak to that? You know, what's your thoughts on
Well,
that? Where's that headed?
you know, the data is really clear. The
Hmm.
polling data is that 52% of people in the US under age 35 to 18,
Hmm.
would prefer
Hmm.
experimenting with socialism. And
Hmm.
the percentages go higher
Right.
when you go darker. So if you're
Hmm.
talking about black folks, Latin,
Hmm.
indigenous people, Asian
Hmm.
American, they are higher than
Hmm.
52%.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there is indeed that sentiment.
Hmm.
Um, you know, the capitalists, they've been exposed. One of the things about what Trump has done is that they've overreached. The tech oligarchs, they're not, now, you know, the robber barons were robber barons, right?
Right.
Let us be clear, right?
Right. Right. Right.
That was financial racial capital at that moment. They
Hmm.
were vicious, but
Hmm.
they built libraries.
Right.
They invested in the
Right.
public, right?
Hmm.
And at some
Hmm.
point, they accepted. Well, no, they didn't accept, but there was a baseline of 70% tax rate for them. Now they used every goddamn loophole,
Right.
but they pay far more taxes than these
Hmm.
damn tech bros are
Right.
willing to contribute.
Hmm.
So I guess what I'm saying is that they felt some connection to the
Hmm.
broader society. Now, mainly they were vampiric, but they wasn't trying to kill you. They just trying to suck some blood.
Right. Right.
The
Right.
tech bros have no level of human decency, right? If you've ever seen Elon Musk on TV,
Yeah. Right.
what the fuck is this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Peter Thiel, no, 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 no. These guys are predators,
Yeah,
and
man.
thus they've overreached.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They've overreached,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think that that's what we're seeing. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is that right wing populism or national populism has some radical elements, and that's why you can have people who vote for Bernie Sanders also vote for the orange, obese, semi-literate guy. So the question is, how do we organize that discontent so
Mm-hmm.
that it flows left and not right?
Mm-hmm. Big deal.
And yeah, I mean that's the task, and also
Mm-hmm.
to understand that when you're dealing with the white American working class, this notion that they call race is not a factor; it's the
Mm-hmm.
driving factor, and we
Your
got to
boy,
be clear
your boy
about
Ben
that.
told you.
Yeah,
he told you, right?
yeah.
Yeah, man.
So, but
I reread Black Reconstruction this summer. I hadn't touched it in many a year.
who?
Uh, and man, the transubstantiation of the white, like
Yeah.
brother, if you took out Andrew Johnson and just put Donald J. Trump in there, you really wouldn't
And you could
have
have
the
put Ronald
change you
Reagan
were.
in there beforehand,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yep,
And you could have
yep.
went back in time and picked up Andrew Jackson
Right?
and
Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson.
Mhm.
So there's a lineage of these
The
folks
lineage of
because
the
it recurs. The
mhm,
predatory character recurs.
mhm,
But I just there are some young people who I find inspirational. Some young organizations that I find
mhm,
inspirational. But the typical college student, well, let me be honest. The last two classes I taught, a fairly
mhm,
large class, 50 something students, and then a very small class, about 12, um, during the Black Liberation Movement. These were the best classes I've had, certainly since before 2014, but
mhm,
some of them without the activism that you guys had, right? That
mhm.
88 to 92, 93 group at Missouri. These kids were sharp, dedicated, committed, and very critical of capitalism, very critical of capitalism. And they did some things that I consider to be unique. Like, we got this local organization, Ubuntu, and we were doing one of our teach-ins at a local church, and some of the students from the class came off the university campus. I'm talking about first year students,
Mhm,
right? So they're still in
mhm,
the dorms,
mhm.
right? And now they haven't allowed the real estate people to exploit them. They got to wait a year. But they came deep into the Black community, which is a long way
Mhm,
from the campus for those kinds of sessions.
mhm.
So there's something bubbling with
Yeah.
these young folk. And in
Mhm.
some way, I almost wish, but I don't really,
Yeah.
that I hadn't said, I'm out, I'm
Mhm.
out, I'm out, I'm out. Yeah, so I think something's bubbling, but we've got to be able to organize them and teach them how to organize beyond social media. That's
Mhm.
a mobilization strategy, not an organizing strategy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so
No doubt.
that's my 2 cents.
No, that's great, man. We should
Wait a
probably
minute,
end it
there's
there.
no more pennies. There's no more pennies. I can't have 2 cents. Dave, yeah, man, I appreciate you. You know that.
Absolutely, man.
Appreciate you.
Likewise. Yeah, I can't wait until the episode posts on YouTube,
Yeah.
man. I'm gonna be sending it around.
Okay, great. All right, brother, we got to catch up on our favorite topic
I
because
know.
I'm sick, man. I'm just sick.
I'm actually hopeful, but I know I'm the only one. So we're
No,
gonna get it together.
I'm
Mhm.
hopeful, but right now I'm sick.
Okay.
Deuce,
I feel
Deuce
you.
is, I got to get Deuce well.
Yeah, yeah. We're
Yeah,
gonna be all right.
yeah, yeah. We can still win that shit.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, my
All right, brother.
brother. We'll
Peace out.
call it in. Peace out.